Sagittarius. Your mother's silent sacrifice. It's time you know the truth she never said. There are truths that scream and there are truths that whisper. But the ones that change you the most are the ones she never said. Sagittarius, you've always admired strength. You live with fire in your soul and truth in your voice. But not everyone is built like you. Not everyone reveals their pain. And sometimes the person who loved you most, your mother, was the one who suffered in silence so that you could keep shining. You remember her smile, don't you? Always there. Even when her eyes seemed tired. Even when her body moved slower. Even when you asked if she was okay and she replied, "I'm fine." Even if she wasn't. That was her gift. And her burden. This is the story you were never told. The chapters she tucked away in order to protect you. And now the time has come. Her soul is ready. And you are finally strong enough to know the truth. In this sacred journey, we'll walk through what was hidden, softly, lovingly, and let it teach you not only about her, but about yourself. This isn't just a story about sacrifice. It's a story of love that transcends silence and awakens something fierce and beautiful inside you. If your heart is already stirring, let it open. And if this video speaks to you, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Zodiac Wisdom. I'm Sophia, and what you're about to remember has been waiting for you all along. Gate 1. The woman who smiled through everything, even as she broke inside. You thought she was unbreakable. Sagittarius, you've always admired her strength. The way she stood tall. The way she seemed to carry everything without asking for help. The way her laughter still rang out even when life wasn't easy. To you, she was the foundation beneath your fire. Steady. Sure. Solid. She never let you see the cracks. But they were there. Your mother was a woman of quiet endurance. A soul who believed that love meant holding pain alone so others wouldn't have to. She smiled not because she was always happy, but because she didn't want you to worry. And maybe you were too young to notice, or maybe your free spirit was always looking toward what came next. But behind that warm voice and those busy hands, behind every, "I'm okay," and "don't worry about me," there were moments when she broke. And you never saw it. That's the part that hurts, isn't it? That realization that while you were learning how to live, she was learning how to hide. Because that was her version of love. Not words, but sacrifices. Not grand gestures, but invisible choices. She gave up more than you ever knew. Quietly, completely, and without a trace of resentment. There's a Sagittarius woman named Alina I once met. She told me that her mother always hummed the same lullaby when she cooked. Even on days when the bills were tight, or when the house was filled with tension, the song never stopped. It wasn't until years later, after her mother had passed, that Alina learned the truth, that during the hardest times, her mother would cry in the pantry, just out of view, then come out smiling with a plate of food. "She didn't want me to associate survival with suffering," Alina said. "She wanted me to grow up believing life was beautiful, even when it was hard for her." And that is the kind of love most people never recognize until it's gone. Sagittarius, your nature is expansive. You search for wisdom, for meaning, for answers beyond the veil. But there are some truths that come not from study, but from stillness. And when you pause, truly pause, and remember her not as a mother, but as a woman, a human being, you begin to see what she never let herself say. The days she worked when she was sick. The nights she stayed awake when you were out late, worrying but never texting because she didn't want to seem controlling. The times she let go of her own dreams so yours could bloom. The fears she swallowed. The regrets she buried. The weight she carried so you could fly. These were not small things. These were soul-level decisions. And maybe there were times when you misunderstood her silence as indifference. Or her tiredness as distance. Maybe you got angry when she didn't open up, when she seemed emotionally unavailable. But now you see she wasn't cold. She was exhausted. She wasn't withholding. She was protecting you in the only way she knew how. And that's where the healing begins. Because this part of the journey isn't about guilt. It's about awareness. It's about honoring what she gave without ever asking for credit. It's about letting go of the story that you should have known sooner, and embracing the truth that you know now. That love isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it wears a smile so that yours can remain unbroken. You're older now, wiser. And as a Sagittarius, your greatest gift is that your soul is always seeking a higher truth, even in pain. So here's the invitation: look again. Look at her not through the lens of what she gave you, but of what she withheld from herself so that you could grow. Look at her choices through the lens of compassion, of maturity, of presence, and then bring that understanding home. Start noticing the people around you who may be doing the same. The friend who always listens but never talks about herself. The father who works late but never complains. The partner who seems so strong until you realize their silence is a shield. Because once you understand the silent language of sacrifice, you begin to hear it everywhere. And you begin to soften not just toward them but toward yourself. Because maybe, just maybe, you've inherited more from her than you realize. You're strong like she was, independent like she was, protective like she was. And sometimes that means you too carry things in silence. You too smile when something inside you is aching. But now, Sagittarius, you have the wisdom to break that cycle. To hold space for both strength and vulnerability. To say, yes, I'm okay. And also, but here's what's really going on inside. That is the gift she gives you now, from wherever she is. The freedom to live not just as a reflection of her strength, but as an evolution of it. She built a life of quiet endurance so that you could live out loud. She smiled so you could laugh freely. She gave in silence so that you would one day speak your truth with clarity, grace, and courage. Let her memory teach you to listen deeply. Not just to others but to yourself. Let her quiet sacrifices remind you that strength is not the absence of emotion, but the presence of love in its purest form. And if one day you feel her presence, a breeze that stills your heart, a scent that brings tears to your eyes, a sudden thought that brings her voice back into your mind, know that she is not asking for recognition. She's simply reminding you, I chose you. Always. Gate 2. The hidden truths, a piece of her you never knew. Not every truth is spoken. Some are wrapped in silence and stored in the heart, protected like fragile glass. And your mother, Sagittarius, was a keeper of many truths. She didn't hide them to deceive you. She hid them to protect you. From pain, from fear, from burden she didn't want your young shoulders to carry. She believed that her love should be a shield, not a mirror of her suffering. And so she kept parts of her life tucked away, behind gentle smiles and everyday routines. But truth has a way of returning. Not to hurt you but to free you. Maybe it began with a letter you found years later, folded neatly in the back of a drawer you rarely opened. Maybe it was something your aunt whispered to you at her funeral, her eyes avoiding yours as if the words themselves had waited too long. Or maybe it was a line in her old diary, left behind like a trail of breadcrumbs for the moment you were finally ready to follow. One Sagittarius man I once guided, named Theo, found such a truth in the form of a sealed envelope labeled with his name, written in his mother's familiar script. It wasn't discovered until 6 months after her passing, tucked into an old photo album. Inside was a simple message. I didn't want you to carry this, but now you're ready. I made choices I never told you about. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted you to feel free to become yourself. The letter went on to reveal a difficult truth, that she had turned down a life-changing opportunity, one she had dreamed of in her youth, because she couldn't bear to leave him behind. He was stunned. All his life he had believed she simply didn't pursue her dreams. He had judged her silently. And now, knowing the truth, his heart broke, not just with sorrow but with reverence. Sagittarius, this is what hidden truths do. They shift the axis of memory. They take what you thought you understood and add layers of humanity, sacrifice, and complexity. Suddenly, the woman you knew as mom becomes someone far more real, flawed, nuanced, brave in ways you never saw. And that changes everything. Because once you uncover what she never said, you stop idealizing or resenting her, and you start understanding her. The pieces fall into place. Her moods, her choices, her silences. The way she hesitated when you asked about her past. The way she always looked at you a second too long when you achieved something big. The way she kept certain doors in the house always closed, not out of secrecy, but to preserve the boundary between her pain and your joy. You may even find yourself grieving a second time. Not because she's gone, but because now you finally see how deeply she loved you. How many things she swallowed back to keep your path light. It's not just loss you're feeling now. It's honor. It's recognition. It's the slow, aching realization that her silence was a language of devotion you're only now beginning to translate. For some Sagittarius souls, This moment brings clarity about inherited patterns. Maybe you discover that your mother was once a wild, freedom-seeking spirit like you. Maybe she too longed for open skies and self-expression, but was pulled back by duty, family, or cultural expectations. And in protecting you from her story, she gave you the very freedom she was denied. Do you see the full circle now? She didn't tell you because she wanted you to choose your life without the weight of hers. But now the veil has lifted, and as you hold these hidden truths in your hands, delicate, sacred, almost too big to comprehend, you begin to feel something rise in your chest. Not guilt, not regret, but a fierce, unshakable compassion. And this compassion isn't just for her. It's for yourself too. For the times you misunderstood her. For the judgments you carried. For the moments you were too caught up in your own journey to see the woman quietly unraveling behind you. And now you can let those pieces soften inside you. Because the truth, when received with love, never wounds, it heals. There's a woman named Mireille, another Sagittarius I once knew, who found an old voicemail from her mother years after her passing. In it, her mother simply said, "I'm proud of you even when I don't say it. There's more to my story than you know. But I want you to write yours fully." That message became Mireille's anchor. Every time she doubted herself, every time she hesitated to follow a bold path, she would replay it. Not for answers, but for permission. Permission to live, to choose differently, to honor her mother's silence not with sorrow, but with courage. Sagittarius, this is the moment when you too are given permission to lay down the version of your mother you once knew and pick up the fuller, deeper story. To stop wishing she had told you more and start receiving what she was finally ready to give you in spirit when you were ready. And you are ready. You have the strength now, the perspective, the emotional maturity, and perhaps most importantly, you have the heart wide enough to hold both the joy and the sorrow of this truth. So listen, revisit the memories, hold that letter, reread that journal entry. Let the mystery unfold not as something to solve, but as something to feel. Her soul is not bound by time, and neither is her love. She didn't say everything then because she trusted one day you would find it yourself. And here you are. You found it. Now the question is, what will you do with it? Gate 3. When pain turns to light, how her sacrifice changed you. There comes a moment, Sagittarius, when the past no longer weighs you down. It lifts you. Not because the pain has vanished, but because it has finally transformed. This is what happens when you learn the truth she never told you. When her silence becomes a voice inside your chest. When her sacrifice, once invisible, now pulses like a steady heartbeat in your soul. It begins to change how you see everything, not just her but yourself. You begin to understand. You were not only raised by her strength, you were shaped by her love. And not the kind of love that shouts its name in the street or shows up with dramatic gestures. Her love was quiet, subtle, sacred. It was the kind of love that would give you the last piece of bread and pretend she wasn't hungry. The kind that let you sleep in on exam days while she tiptoed around the house, though she hadn't slept at all. The kind of love that said no to her own desires so that you could say yes to yours. And now as you look back, not with regret but with reverence, you begin to see just how much of her is alive in you. Perhaps before, you moved through life with a certain detachment. Not coldness but a kind of distance, a defense mechanism you built to protect your own fire. You chased freedom. You ran toward horizons. But part of you feared deep emotional gravity, feared it might pull you under. And now, standing face to face with the depth of her love, you realize that gravity grounds you. It roots your freedom and meaning. You were never meant to fly away from pain. You were meant to rise through it. That is the fire of Sagittarius. And now it burns brighter because of her. There's a man I once guided, Jonas, a Sagittarius musician, who told me that after discovering a hidden part of his mother's story, he found himself writing music differently. It's like, I'm not just singing for myself anymore, he said. I'm singing the song she never got to sing. His work became more raw, more honest. He stopped trying to sound perfect and started speaking truth. Her silence made me louder, he told me. Not in noise, but in authenticity. Sagittarius, this is the power of integration. When you stop running from what hurt you and instead invite it to teach you, everything begins to shift. You begin to walk through the world differently. You no longer take things for granted. You notice the quiet gestures, the small sacrifices others make. You become gentler, more patient. Not because you've lost your fire, but because your fire has matured. And you begin to speak with a voice that others feel, not just hear. You no longer need to defend your strength because you know where it came from. And when life throws you into storms, as it always does, you carry her in your bones. The part of her that held everything together now lives in you. And you don't break the same way anymore. You bend. You breathe. You remember. You remember her face when she looked at you with pride, even when her own dreams were fading. You remember the days she didn't complain, even when she was hurting. You remember the countless times she made life look easy when it wasn't. And suddenly, those memories become anchors. You stop resenting the past. You start honoring it. Because without her sacrifice, you wouldn't be who you are now. There's a woman named Lynn, a Sagittarius healer I once met. After discovering a letter her mother wrote but never sent, one that revealed deep fears, lost dreams, and an unwavering love, Lynn changed her whole life. She left a job that no longer aligned with her soul. She started teaching women how to reclaim their power after generations of silence. "I thought my mom didn't understand me," she said. Turns out she was me, before life taught her to shrink. That realization turned Lynn's pain into a compass. And Sagittarius, it can do the same for you. Maybe now, after everything, you feel a new kind of responsibility, not out of pressure but out of love. A responsibility to live fully, to speak your truth, to walk through life without apology. Because every time you do, you carry her forward, not just in memory but in action. She gave you freedom by keeping her own struggles quiet. Now you honor that gift by refusing to hide yours. You become the embodiment of what she couldn't say. You become the voice of her love. You become her living prayer. And perhaps for the first time you forgive yourself for not knowing sooner, for not seeing through the smile, for needing time to understand. That forgiveness is important, because guilt doesn't serve your soul. Love does. So let this moment be a turning point. Let it remind you that pain is not the end. It is the beginning of meaning. That the deeper you feel, the deeper you live. And that her sacrifice was never meant to weigh you down. It was meant to lift you. You are no longer just her child. You are her legacy, her light, her truth, spoken in a voice she helped shape, now strong enough to tell the whole story. And when you doubt yourself, Sagittarius, when you feel lost or uncertain, remember this. You were made from love that never gave up. You were shaped by a woman who chose you over and over again, even when it cost her something unseen. That kind of love doesn't disappear. It evolves. It guides. And now it moves through you. So live in a way that says, "I saw you even if it took me time." Live in a way that honors her truth. Not just with words but with actions. Speak louder, love deeper, walk braver. Because now the pain is no longer just pain. It is a light. And you are its flame. Gate 4. The truth that set you free. And the moment you forgave yourself. There is a moment, Sagittarius, when the weight of truth does not crush you. It liberates you. When understanding becomes a doorway, not a wall. And when the pain of not knowing fades, giving rise to something softer, fuller, more forgiving. Not just toward others, but toward yourself. You've come so far in this journey. You've seen her strength. You've uncovered what was hidden. You've felt the ache of what could not be said. But now there's one more step, perhaps the hardest of all. Facing the part of you that wishes you had seen it all sooner. And here's what I want you to hear, clearly, gently, without judgment. You were never meant to carry that burden. You were a child, evolving, exploring, seeking. You were never meant to read between the lines she refused to draw. You were not built to decode silence. You were built to receive love. And you did. But still the ache lingers, doesn't it? I should have noticed. I wish I had asked more. Maybe if I had been more present, she wouldn't have had to suffer alone. These are the whispers guilt plants in the heart long after the moment has passed. They masquerade as care, as reverence, even as love. But really they are chains. And Sagittarius, your spirit was never made for chains. Now is the time to forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for being young. Forgive yourself for not seeing what she never meant for you to see. Forgive yourself for growing up under the illusion that love must be loud to be real. Forgive yourself for living freely, boldly, while she stayed grounded for your sake. And then let that forgiveness become a foundation, because it is from that place of self-compassion that your new life begins. Not a life haunted by what you didn't know, but one inspired by what you now understand. There's a woman named Clara I once worked with, another Sagittarius, full of fire and brilliance, but weighed down by the belief that she'd somehow failed her mother by not being there enough. Her mother had battled illness privately, insisting everything was fine, and Clara, believing her, had continued chasing her passions, traveling, building her dream business. Only after her mother's passing did the truth come out, and with it came an avalanche of guilt. But through our sessions, Claire began to see it differently. Her mother had chosen to protect her from the pain, not because she didn't trust her, but because she trusted her spirit enough to let her fly. She didn't want her daughter's journey to be interrupted by fear. And when Clara finally accepted that, she wept. Not out of regret, but out of freedom. That's what truth does when it's fully seen. It doesn't bind you to the past. It lets you reclaim it. It turns sorrow into reverence, pain into wisdom, memory into momentum. And that is what your mother wants for you now. She doesn't want you to carry the weight of what if. She wants you to live in the light of what is. The truth is, you were deeply loved, even in the silences. You were chosen over and over again in ways invisible to the world. And now you get to choose how that story continues. You can keep carrying guilt, or you can turn it into gratitude. Gratitude for the invisible sacrifices. Gratitude for the life you were given. Gratitude for the strength that now runs in your blood. This is the moment Sagittarius becomes the archer again. Not one who runs, but one who aims. And this time your arrow is pointed not outward, but inward, toward clarity, toward peace, toward a kind of freedom you've never felt before. Because real freedom isn't just doing whatever you want. It's living without shame. It's walking forward without regret. It's saying, I see now. I know better. And I will live better because of her. And so you do. You forgive the parts of you that were blind because they led you here. You forgive the days you missed her pain, because now you carry her strength. You forgive yourself for not saving her, because that was never your burden to carry. You were never meant to save her. You were meant to remember her, to embody her love, to let it shape you into someone more awake, more present, more aligned. That is the real healing. It's not about fixing the past. It's about transforming how you carry it. Now, when you think of her, the pain will still come, but it will come wrapped in light. Her memory will bring tears, yes, but also fire. It will remind you to be kind when it's hard, to speak truth even when your voice shakes, to offer love even when you feel empty, because that's what she did. She didn't tell you everything, but she gave you everything. And now you finally see it. Now you finally receive it. Now you can live because of it. So take a deep breath, Sagittarius. Let the past exhale through you. Let it soften your edges, not harden them. Let it open your heart wider than it's ever been. And from that place of wholeness, from that quiet, holy recognition, make this vow. I forgive myself. I honor her. And I will live in a way that makes her sacrifices matter. Because the truth has set you free. And now you can finally come home to yourself. Conclusion. Her love now alive in you. Sagittarius, you've walked through a story that wasn't told with words, but with gestures, with silence, with choices made behind closed doors. And now you see it all. You see her not just as the woman who raised you, but as the soul who shaped you piece by quiet piece. The truth didn't break you, broke you open. Now there's more room in you for compassion, for courage, for clarity. You no longer carry her in memory alone. You carry her in your actions, in the way you show up, in the way you forgive, in the way you love without needing recognition. And maybe on some quiet morning you'll feel her again, when the light hits just right, or when a scent in the air brings tears to your eyes. You'll close your eyes, smile softly and say, I see now. Thank you. Her sacrifice wasn't meant to silence you. It was meant to awaken you. So let it. Let her truth live in how you speak your own. Let her strength live in your softness. Let her story remind you that the most powerful love is the one that frees, not binds. And if this journey has touched something deep within you, dear Sagittarius, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Zodiac Wisdom. Because here we remember, we heal, we rise. For her, for you, For the love that never dies.